Alright, here's my Ducati Monster 797 Plus. This is the Plus model. Basically, it just has a windscreen and a back crowd, but I took off that just because I don't like that being there. So I've had this bike now for a few months. Finally rode it. I haven't rode it for actually for a few months. But anyways, so I'm gonna do a 1,000-mile review. So let's look at the numbers here. See where I'm at. So total is 1,033 miles. I just got back from a ride. Let's see, 125 miles I rode. So about 3.5 hours, or 3 hours and 17 minutes of actual riding time when the engine is on. So anyway, so 1,000 miles on this bike so far. Now I could give a better assessment of it. The last time I talked about this, I barely only put like 100 miles on it. So that was just my initial thoughts. But now that now the bike has a 1,000 miles, talk more about it. So basically, it mostly hasn't changed. Everything's pretty much the same still. The only thing that has changed is before, when I talked about this bike, I talked about how good the chassis is, and the chassis is fantastic. Chassis is good, the fork is good, the wheel swing arm is good, everything is nice and stiff, holds its line very well. Before I mentioned that I thought the springs were kind of firm, and the damping on this bike wasn't that great, and I'm gonna have to take that back. The damping on it is fine, and the spring rate on it is fine for certain types of riding. So this bike is kind of tuned for, this bike's not tuned to put around town. If you're gonna put around in an urban area going 40 miles an hour, or less, this bike's not meant for that. It's horrible for that, actually. If you want to do that, get a scooter, and that's what a scooter is for. This bike's meant to be ridden a little bit harder, a little faster. So basically, if you're going under 40, I would say even under 50 miles an hour, it's still, it's kind of clunky and kind of clumsy, mainly because the suspension is very firm, and the chassis is really stiff, and the brakes is like real strong. So for those situations, this is I would say it's too much bike. But for doing 60 plus miles an hour, this bike is sweet. It's like the chassis is so. This is of all the bikes I've ever owned, this bike has the best chassis I've ever ridden, or that I've ever owned. It handles so well. The fork, this is swing arm, the frame. It handles so well. It just holds a line. Whatever I'm going, on whatever corner I'm going, it just holds that line. Whatever, and it transitions really easily too, very effortless. Great example of holding a line is I'm going, leaning over, and also I hit a pothole. All the other bikes I've ever had, when I hit a pothole, it disturbs the bike. It's like shakes it up, and it's like, whoa, you kind of lose your line a little bit. With this bike, it just hits it, and it's just like, and it just stays there. You feel the pothole, but it just stays there, and you just keep on going. So it's fantastic. And when you go faster, the spring rate is meant for you to go faster. So at a slower speed, the spring rate is a little bit too firm, and the damping is kind of not tuned for that either. But when you go faster, 60 plus miles an hour, the spring rate feels just right, and the damping feels just right. Everything feels just right. It's like everything falls into place. This bike is surprisingly really sporty. Yeah, so let's compare this bike to, say, the most recent middleweight that I've had that's sporty is my 2016 Yamaha XSR 900. That bike was sweet. The engine was fabulous on that bike. I love that engine, but the rest of the bike, meh. Compared to this, The rest of the bike doesn't compare. Even when I had put on Olin's suspension on my XSR 900, it still doesn't compare to this. You know, the Olin's, the damping was better. The damping was better, but you still have the flex of the fork and the flex of the chassis and the flex of the swing arm and all that stuff. And it, even with the good Olin's going in the corner, hitting a pothole, the damping was fine, but that pothole still was enough to disturb the chassis. Cause of chassis effects or whatever, and would kind of throw you off a little bit, and kind of buckle you a little bit. But with this bike, it doesn't. It just stays. It's like just solid. You feel that pothole, but it stays there and it's solid. So wow, what a difference having a solid chassis makes. And the brakes on this, oh my god, it's phenomenal. Of all the bikes I've owned, this bike has the best brakes. It's like effortless, man. It's like my braking hand, it doesn't get tired. When you do a long descent, especially a long downhill technical descent. On other bikes, my hand would, by the end, my hand would get kind of tired from braking a lot. But with this bike, it's just like, it's so effortless. You don't need to use that much force on your hands to put the power down on the brakes. So this is only bike where I felt like as I squeezed the brake, because I'm not used to that power. I'm used to less power, so I'm used to squeezing harder. So with this bike, when I squeeze that same hardness, I feel like I'm gonna flip over the bike's gonna flip over because the brake is just gonna stop right there. So it's like, it has so much power. So it doesn't need that much effort. The engine is fantastic. This engine is so smooth. I don't recall. I've ridden. My brother used to have an SV650. I don't recall the SV650. 90-degree twin being as smooth as this engine is. This thing's just so smooth. I was like, wow. One of the smoothest engines I've ever ridden. Actually, I was surprised. It's not buzzy at all. It's just smooth. And the torque on it is fantastic. The torque on this, this is very streetable. The 90-degree V-twin is very streetable, meaning I could be at 3,000 RPM, accelerating up a hill, and the engine is fine. If you try to do that on an inline four, man, forget it. It wants to like lug and it wants to stall or something. So you got to downshift. But this bike at 3,000 RPM, uphill, accelerating, no problem. It just goes up. So the torque is fantastic on this bike. Very low down. Everything's very low down, and that's very streetable. Maybe at the track, if you're at the track, you're revving up at the higher rev, then that's fine. But on the street, you don't ride like that. No one rides like that on the street. So that's where the bottom end power and torque and the mid range comes into play. And this bike has bottom range torque and mid-range torque and power. It has plenty. There's more than enough. So what a fantastic bike it is. And again, I haven't ridden this bike in like a couple months now. It's been busy with this and that, and I haven't had time to go riding, or I've been doing other things, other things, and I've been mountain biking again and such. So there's only so much time, right? The other interesting about this bike is that even though I haven't ridden that much, I haven't ridden a big bike in a while, and I haven't ridden that length of time in a while, because my commute is only like an hour, so that doesn't make that much of a difference. But usually when you ride for 2 hours, 3 hours or more, you get tired, right? And all my other bigger bikes I've had in the past, when I rode that many miles and that many hours, by the end of the ride, I'm beat. I'm like, oh man, I need to take a break, or no, that's it for me. That's it. I'm done for the day. But with this bike, I just got back and I still feel fresh. I still feel like, oh, I could go for another 3.5 hours, another 125 miles, and I'll be fine. So my butt's a little sore, because I'm not used to the seat yet. But that's about it. Otherwise, everything else feels fine. I don't feel tired at all. I still feel energetic, surprisingly, really surprisingly. And with all the other bikes I have, bigger bikes I've had, if I ride that many miles, that many hours. Usually, I mean, I could ride for more, but usually I can feel it, by then. Usually, once I get to like 100 miles or so, or past 100 miles, that's when I could start feeling tired. But with this bike, I still feel fresh. Let's see, what else with this? Yeah, I think it's a sweet bike. It's I mean, there's a few things about it that actually the main thing that I don't like about it is the shifter. So the shifter, before I didn't notice it, but I noticed it on this ride. The shifter on this bike, the lower gears you're at, for example, if you shift from first to second, it's clunky. The lower gears are more clunky. As you shift up and up into the gears, each time you shift up into the next gear, upshift into the next gear, it gets smoother, and also it gets easier, meaning it requires less effort to upshift. So from first to second, you need more effort, and when it does shift into it, it's that clunk, and you can feel that clunk. But from fifth to sixth gear, hardly requires any effort, and you barely feel a clunk at all. So like 56 gear feels kind of like a Honda, for example. All my Hondas kind of feels like that. It doesn't matter which gear you're in. It all feels kind of very soft and sort of vague feeling. Whereas with this one, the first to second gear, or even second to third gear, it's much clunkier, and it's very positive. It doesn't feel vague at all. It's like you shifted. It's a very positive up click, and when you let go of the clutch, and the gears actually engage each other, it's very positive. Unlike say any Hondas I've ever had or ridden. So on the lower gears, it feels kind of like a Moto Guzzi. If I compare it to my Moto Guzzi before I had, it feels kind of very positive feeling, and it requires more effort to shift. But when you do shift, it's very, the feedback is very positive on the lever, but also when you disengage the clutch, when you release the clutch and engage the gears, it has a very positive feedback. So the lower gears on this has that, but the upper gears doesn't. So that's the only downside I would say, is that it's not even throughout that downshift. So I would rather have it like same clunkiness all through all the gears, or same smoothness through all the gears. So that the clunkiness at the bottom and smoother or lighter at the top, it just throws me off. Or at least I'm not used to it. Because I'm used to neither all clunky or all soft and smoother. So I think that's probably the only negative I think I can think of, and I'm not sure if that's even a negative. Some people might like that, but yeah. Let's see, what else with this bike? I think that's about it. It's surprisingly well mannered. At higher speeds, it's very solid. I think again because of the chassis, it feels so stable, and it's like wow, it feels so solid. So definitely not like any other bikes I've ever owned. I've owned a bunch of Hondas. Most of the bikes I've ever owned are Hondas, but I've had Yamahas and Kawasaki's and even Triumph. Now I've never owned a Triumph sporty bike before. I've only had their Bonnevilles. I've only had Bonneville, so no like street triple or speed triple or anything like that. But and I hear those those, especially the street triple. I hear that chassis, it's really nice too. So I have no idea how that rides compared to a Ducati chassis. But yeah. So that's my 1,000-mile review. Otherwise, everything else is pretty much the same. If you look at my first initial review, yeah. All right. So that's it. Thanks for watching.